My name's Lester Firkins, and currently I'm chairman of the James Lind Alliance Strategy and Development Group. Starfish. I've been involved with Y Touring on Starfish right from the beginning to the end, but I've not worked on any other projects. Within Starfish, my role was right from the outset. I was invited to be part of the initial advisory group because people who were already involved with Y Touring were asked to assemble an advisory group. They knew of me, and so they asked me to come along, and I spoke at the first planning meeting as part of the broader advisory group to the production team and the proposed author. I decided to become involved, if I'm being honest, because I was invited. I remember clearly coming to the first meeting of the advisory group, not knowing what it was about. Because the world of medicine and research is still fairly new to me, I rely on others to say, Lester, this is a good thing to be involved in or not. And somebody said, oh, you really should get involved with this. So I received the invitation to come to the meeting. I looked at the website for Y Touring just to get a bit of background information. I knew I was going to have to give a presentation on my story, my history. So I prepared a little, although interestingly I didn't prepare that much for it. I came fairly spontaneously. I didn't know what to expect. Well, the process started with a meeting of the advisory group where I just thought I was going to come along, give a presentation, be asked a few questions, have the chance to ask a few questions and then go away. As it turned out on Starfish, the involvement of myself and indeed my family grew, and so it meant that our involvement carried right through to the production, to seeing almost like the final play in a long series. So initially, when I first came along, I thought it was going to be just for the start, but I wasn't misled, but I was under the wrong apprehension. If I look back now on Starfish and how I feel about it, clearly there is some separation that needs to occur because it features within the storyline part of the story about my late son's own experiences and journey. Clearly, if I look at that element, it's a most extraordinary tribute to his life, the good and the bad. And so when I think about that element, it is one of the greatest things that we've sort of done, I think. Now, that, of course, is just for me and my family. That's of little interest to the wider community. But if I look at the way Starfish worked from start to finish, the one thing that has amazed me more than anything else is the meticulous attention to detail and attention to people's comments and feelings, whether that's from the scriptwriter, whether that's from the directors, whether that's from the actors, and indeed whether it's from the audience. It just, everything was so tightly planned and properly executed and modern, if that's the right word. It just seems to be a completely self-contained and really inspiring project. I would say it's extraordinarily successful, not least of which we saw the play, I think it was 4 times, and on each of those occasions it was in a different environment with a different audience, and without exception the audience totally engaged. I think probably the most impressive and exciting moment was one of the last ones we saw, which was at the Royal Albert Hall, where there was a mix of different types of young people. And my children are much older now. They're sort of in their 30s, so I've lost touch with what people in their sort of teens are like. And when they came in, I thought, well, I just thought it's a bunch of teenagers. And yet, after the play, the questions that the play stimulated them to ask were stunning. And afterwards they came up and talked to my wife and I because of the fact that our story was interwoven. But they weren't maudlin questions. They weren't sympathetic pat on the head, I'm asking this to make you feel better questions. They were really penetrating questions. And so therefore two things tell me about that. One, that I've underestimated the teenagers of today, but also that the whole Starfish experience that they went through, they took very, very seriously, and were able to then, within a short space of time, ask pertinent and challenging questions. Looking at the themes that Starfish explores, it is something I really believe in, because it's the whole thing about clinical trials. And it's occurred to me as I've gone through my own journey that the moment you have to think about, do you engage in a clinical trial, whether it's to do with your health and illness or that of somebody close to you, if you haven't thought about engagement in clinical trials up until that moment, you're not in the right place necessarily to think about it, because quite often you will be ill, or your loved one, the person in question, will be ill, and so therefore that's going to change the way you think. And also you may have to be making some decisions very quickly. So given that it's likely, or it could be likely, that all of us at some stage or another would be invited to be in a clinical trial, to me it's the same as carrying an organ donor card. I think that people should have the opportunity to think about their position with regard to clinical trials and almost make a statement, keep a record somewhere, so that if, for instance, they were incapable of making the decision, somebody could, at that time, somebody could look back and say, yeah, that's good. We know what that person wanted. And I think something that I picked up from the audience who I saw listening to Starfish and watching Starfish is that that period of reflection and decision making was occurring with them. The way the theatre of debate works is interesting to me, because when I was at school or college, this type of approach never occurred, but then in the sort of late 50s you wouldn't have expected it to. So therefore you're approaching a totally different community, which I would have understood. What struck me though was the feedback I saw from a lot of the students and when I was talking to them, because clearly the idea of seeing a film or seeing a play within school is not unique in itself. And I particularly remember seeing very positive comments from students that started off with, we thought it was just going to be another film or play about sex or drugs. And so therefore the fact that it wasn't about those two surprised them. But the uniqueness of what you do is that you don't just show the play and leave notes for the teachers or resource material. The integral part of what you do, and indeed the most important part of what you do, is the debate moment that occurs after the film, or the play rather, has stimulated thinking. So it's inextricably linked. You wouldn't be successful, I don't think, in the way you are and keep getting called back to different schools, and indeed the same schools on more than one occasion, if the ingredient of the properly managed and led debate didn't occur immediately after the play. If I had to describe why touring in one word, and I thought about this, it would be meticulous. Now, in using meticulous, from me, that is about the greatest positive thing I can say. Some people might think it's a negative. Meticulous sounds like nitpicking. It sounds like attention to detail and not caring about the bigger picture. But that's not what I'm looking at. When I say meticulous, I mean getting the project right for the audience, and not taking any shortcuts, and really working on the detail, because, as I say, I've seen the production several times, and it's the detail, it's always the detail that will get people. The broad story, well, it's a story you could see probably on TV most nights, but the thing that turns it round is the detail, and so that's why I would use the word meticulous.